Welcome to the series Speaking Up for Point Molate, in which invited speakers will address key questions and issues about Point Molate, and members of the public can ask questions. We begin this program by recognizing that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lijan Ohlone. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on this land and respect the connection of the Ohlone people to this land, past, present, and future. We commit to sustaining ongoing relationships with the Confederated Villages to build a better future for all who now make this land their home. As an overview to the series tonight, please limit questions to 1 minute. If you would like to raise more complex issues, please put them in the chat so we can consider them for future sessions. And though issues around Point Molate can be contentious, let's be polite and courteous. Also, please use the chat to let us know how we can improve, and leave your email address if you'd like us to send you announcements directly. All chat will appear in the recordings. This session and future sessions will be recorded and posted to the Speaking Up for Point Molate YouTube channel, and very soon they'll be posted on the Point Molate Alliance website. Next week, our speaker will be Dr. Laura Wilkie, an archaeologist and professor at UC Berkeley, who will be speaking on Point Molate's Chinese shrimp camp. I'm Pam Stello. I'm a co-chair of the Point Molate Alliance and the Richmond Shoreline Alliance, and I serve on the board of Citizens for East Shore Parks. I live in Richmond. I'm also a co-founder of this series with Sally Tobin. Danny Zaki is our Zoom administrator. She's the Bay and Shoreline organizer for the San Francisco Bay chapter of the Sierra Club. Before the Sierra Club, Danny worked with the Richmond Listening Project. We are very pleased to have Sally Tobin with us today as our speaker. Sally is a biologist and retiree of the Stanford Center for Biomedical Ethics. She received a Ph.D. in developmental biology from the University of Wisconsin. She's a member of the Point Molate Alliance, the Richmond Shoreline Alliance, and the Bay Area Sea Kayakers, among others. She serves on the board of Citizens for East Shore Parks and lives in Richmond. Sally, thank you for speaking this evening. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you, Pam. So what I'm going to deal with tonight is I'm going to talk about the key roles of water in shaping the terrain and the ecology of Point Molate. California is justifiably famous for its water, but usually we think of the California water being in rivers and oceans, and this is going to be on a much smaller scale. And the critical question that I want to bring up is, how does everything work together? So my hope is that the next time that any of you visits Point Molate, you'll think about how the water and the soil and the sunshine and living things are influencing each other in complex interactive networks. So this will be kind of an overview. We're going to have future speakers that will talk about specific ecosystems and terrestrial plants and eelgrass and geology and many other topics. So I think that everybody has a story about how they found out about Point Molate. And this next slide, there we go, shows how I was introduced to Point Molate as a member of the Bay Area Sea Kayakers, kayaking out from that location. And you can see the kayaks on the far right that have been handed down to the beach level from the picnic level, and I can tell we're just about ready to take off rather than returning because we're not wet. Okay, so and we will talk more about the eroding bank that's behind the sea kayakers. Okay, so I'm going to use this slide as kind of an overview and orientation. Point Molate is the last undeveloped headland on San Francisco Bay. The natural flow of water is from the ridge tops, which is right along here. Oops. Which is along, oops, here we go, which is right along here. And then the water flows down to the bay. The crest is about 400 feet in elevation, so it's steeper than it looks in this slide. Most of the water is from rain, but some areas are greener than others as things dry out during the summer. So it's possible that there may be some spring water also. So as the water flows, it contributes to the formation of subtle systems that are thousands of years old. Plants and animals and fungi and other life forms adapt and evolve as communities under conditions that fit their needs, such as soils and light and water. The entire South watershed, which is right here, the entire South watershed is a complex transition from a dry ridge crest down into the saltwater and the eelgrass of San Francisco Bay. So today, my plan is to take everybody on a walk in Point Molate. And most of the photos were taken on Earth Day when Jim Hansen and I had permission to conduct walking tours. Otherwise, the uphill slope of the South watershed is behind chain link fencing. And as we go along, I'll talk in more detail about coastal terrace prairie and about the value of daylighting streams, even if they're small seasonal streams. All right, so I'm going to illustrate a number of features on this slide. So here is Stenmark Drive. I hope you can see my pointer. Stenmark Drive comes from right near the toll booth for the Richmond San Rafael Bridge and then goes through Point Molate. Right now, it's going along the drum lot, which is that big concrete rectangle immediately above Stenmark Drive. And then below Stenmark Drive is the beach park. And so then Stenmark Drive goes all the way through Point Molate, and this is the historic area. It goes through the historic area and out the other side. So the northern boundary of Point Molate is about here. The boundary with Chevron goes around along the ridge crest, and then the southern boundary is about here. And Point Molate also includes underwater portions. So there is acreage here underwater and also on the other side. This is the actual Point Molate point. And so you can see that part of the point has been flattened. So this is drum lot 1 right here. And then there's a deep water pier going out into the water. And then this is drum lot 2, which is also flattened. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So our actual walking route will be up this hill right here, and then along this, it's kind of a paved trail up the hill. We don't go all the way to the crest, we go all the way up here, and then we'll come back down and come back and go across the drum lot to our starting point. Okay, so we're going to talk a bit about bulldozing because of the 2 drum lots, and we're going to be talking about culverts. One feature of this area is that this pier is actually a deep water pier. So during the Navy era, during World War II, when lots of fuel was being supplied from this pier, then deep water vessels would come in and fill themselves with fuel and take on 55-gallon drums and then go off to support the war effort. All right, and then another thing I'd like to point out is that there are these kind of fingers coming down the hill. These are all kind of valleys that are carved by water. And so as we walk along, we're going to be going in and out of those valleys and the kind of raised parts that separate them. So those are all carved by water. So it's somewhat scarred, but it really is a functional ecosystem that can be restored. Okay. So we're going up the hill. We've just passed the drum lot, which was on our left. And it's hard to tell from this particular view, but over here on the right, the vegetation is really very thick and very green. And there is actually some marshland over here as you walk along. And that's the home of one endangered plant. The Sassoon marsh aster lives in that marshy area right there. So here we go up the side of the hill, and you can see that the trail is curving right here. And that's because the water coming down from the top of the hill has carved a channel down in this direction behind this woman. And so you can see one of the ridges in between and then the channel. And also, you may be able to tell that the terrain is getting a little bit drier. It was pretty lush down below, and now it's actually getting a little bit patchier and a little bit scrubbier. And you can also see in the distance a little bit, this is probably the Tiburon Peninsula right here. Okay, so this is looking down from the path that we're on. The edge of the path is right here in the front part of the photo. And drum lot 2 is over to the left, extending right in here. So we're already up pretty high. This is the Quonset hut that can be seen from the parking lot at the beach park. And this is Red Rock. And you can see the Richmond San Rafael Bridge, and I think this is probably Mount Tam. So now we're going to go around another corner. So we're going around a ridge and back into another drainage channel as we go along. And again, the vegetation's getting drier. And this level spot really doesn't fit with what we've seen so far. So you should be getting suspicious of this right now. What we're doing is looking at the site of an underground fuel storage tank. And I know this is an underground fuel storage tank because the sign says, "Keep off underground storage tank." The Navy installed several underground fuel tanks at Point Molate, and because Point Molate was serving as a fuel depot for the Navy's Pacific operations during World War II. And then here is Angel Island and the Richmond San Rafael Bridge, and again, Red Rock. So now we're going back down the hill. Over on the right of the hikers, you can see pipelines going down the hill. These go down to the vicinity of the pier, and they were probably used to pump fuel either from the storage tanks, or I understand some was pumped from the Chevron refinery. So these are the Earth Day hikers going down the hill. And here's another one. It's a very long hill. Here we have some invasive broom. There are a number of invasive plants at Point Molate. Some of them, like pampas grass, have been targeted for eradication because it would really be nice to restore it to its original shape and form. Okay, so we've come off the hill now, and we are looking at an undulating grassland that is immediately south of the beach area. You can see the beach. The tide is out a little bit, but you can see the beach. It's decorated with a great big truck tire right here. But the part that we're really interested in is this kind of undulating, lumpy grassland right here. And this is a prime example of an assemblage of grasses and insects and flowering plants that are known as coastal terrace prairie. They are totally adapted for the California coast. They have extremely deep roots. They tolerate grazing. They can even tolerate fires. But the main danger these days is one danger is you can kind of see this sort of more tan hue across here. That's an invasive annual grass called, the common name is rattlesnake grass, not because it houses rattlesnakes, but because the seed pods look like rattles. And so that is can take over coastal terrace prairie, and so we need to pay attention to that. And the other huge danger to coastal terrace prairie is developers, because developers have bulldozers, and bulldozers can do in coastal terrace prairie very quickly. So let's see. Coastal terrace prairie is thought to be about 600,000 years old, even though the assemblages are kind of variable from place to place. The species differ from one location to another. And some years ago, the Santa Cruz chapter of the California Native Plant Society had been working on this section of coastal terrace prairie for 12 years. And they'd been trying to identify all the plants that were present. And one year they went out and they removed all the invasive plants. And the next spring, they found species that they had not been able to detect during the previous 12 years. It can be kind of subtle to be able to tell grasses apart. And so it's really tough to tell what species are in a clump until they start to bloom, and they're not going to bloom except on their own cycle. Let's see, so the roots of prairie grasses, the reason that prairie grasses are so drought tolerant and grazing tolerant and fire tolerant is because the roots can go down over 6 feet. So they are not like the shallow rooted annual grasses. Let's see. Now, row crops, agriculture can also disturb coastal terrace prairie because that involves plowing, but coastal terrace prairie will withstand grazing very nicely. So part of the SunCal group's plans for Point Molate included a lot of bulldozer work in the upper watershed on the south part that we just walked through. And there are other areas of coastal terrace prairie that are up there on the hill. And the bulldozing would have knocked out those areas completely. The developer would have built retaining walls so that they could build condominiums, and yet, and then they would have put in a few plantings, but plantings do not restore an ecosystem. I mean, ecosystems are resilient. Plantings are an excellent idea at your own house, but they don't constitute an ecosystem. So now let's go to the beach park. This is the part of Point Molate that most people are familiar with. The stunning view of the bridge and Red Rock. Here the tide is out somewhat, but not really enough so that the eelgrass falls over. Eelgrass is normally supported by water, so when the tide goes out beyond the eelgrass, then the eelgrass kind of flops into place. And this is the only part of Point Molate that is familiar to many Richmonders, because it's the only part that's open to the public. The entire remainder of Point Molate is fenced off. But thanks to Gail McLaughlin, the city council, and an army of volunteers, we now have access to the beach park. So this is along the shore where Point Molate meets San Francisco Bay. And the beach park is located on the bank, which is formed by the fill that was bulldozed to make Drum Lot 2. So all of that dirt that came off of Drum Lot 2 is now down here, and you can see the edge of the bank right along here past the picnic table and the garbage bin. So that explains why the bank is above the beach, and why the beach park trees are mostly about the same age, because they were planted in the early 1940s. And here's another view along the beach. You can see there's kind of a dry, sandy area here, and then a little bit wetter sand along here. This area right through here is incredible sucky mud. And I don't recommend that anybody go out walking on it, because you may lose your shoes. And if you lose your shoes, you may step on a sharp rock. So, but I'm showing this slide because you can see the headland of the point itself. And then here is Drum Lot 1, which is that bulldozed area. And then you go on to the pier, and here is the pier extending out into San Francisco Bay. So how does water get down from the hillside under the drum lot and back out to the beach? Well, this is it. The Navy built a system of culverts, and this is one of the culverts that comes out from under the drum lot. The culverts go under the drum lot, under Stenmark Drive, and then out onto the beach. And you can actually look at all of these culverts by walking up and down the beach. So right now at Point Molate, if you walk up and down the beach, you can find 9, maybe 10 or 11. I don't know if I've been able to find them all, outfalls that are all from culverts that are guiding rainwater and stormwater, and if there's any spring water, away from the uphill area. I've counted 9 from the beach park up to the pier, but there may be more. So the development plans that were proposed, and I hope they never come to fruition, but it's all in legal limbo right now. The development plans called for reducing the number of outfalls to 2 from 9. And that is kind of a massive disturbance of this area. Now, the Point Molate eelgrass beds offshore have done well with 9 outfalls, or they wouldn't be so healthy, because those 9 outfalls have been there since the 1940s. But a further reduction would mean that fresh water coming down from the hillsides would come into the bay with much more force and volume in more limited locations. And it's completely unknown whether that is going to affect eelgrass or whether that's going to affect marine organisms. Now, another option that the developer proposed was retention basins. And retention basins have a strength in that they allow silt to settle, but they're high maintenance for the same reason, because the silt must be removed. And settling basins don't allow for more natural solutions to sea level rise, like living shorelines. We'll be having another speaker who will talk in detail about living shorelines. So as fresh water enters salt water, the fresh water is lighter and it floats on top of the salt water until it gets mixed in by tides and currents and other mixing processes. So this means that reducing the number of outfalls would create large pools of low salinity that might affect the marine embryos that hang out in the eelgrass or the fish or the eelgrass itself. And there's also the question of maintaining enough downhill silt to keep the eelgrass growing, but not so much that you cut off light to the eelgrass because it's a flowering plant like any other, and it needs light to be able to grow and survive. So the solution to all of these culverts and outfalls that would be preferable is ultimately to try to return things to their original condition as much as possible by daylighting streams, which is really the most gentle to the environment technique that you can use. And this shows a stream that's been opened to the air and the sunlight in a small town in Colorado. Now, culverts destroy aquatic ecosystems because they cut the light required by plants, especially long culverts like the ones under the drum lot and under Stenmark Drive. And though at the time the Navy tended to bulldoze and culvert, daylighting streams allows native plants to be preserved and animals to move in when human plans are being considered. So the plans put forward by the SunCal group were even more destructive than the Navy's. And ideally, the rare and complex and resilient ecological fabric at Point Molate will still be there for many generations to appreciate. And part of protecting the earth is working locally to protect public resources like Point Molate. And so I just like to close with the idea that parks are special community sources for equity, health, and recreation. Point Molate represents an opportunity to restore a functional ecosystem through careful planning and scientific approaches. The Point Molate Alliance advocates for using that wild and beautiful tract of land from the hilltops into the bay for environmental education, for recreation by community members and families, and for offering professional education to Richmond youth in science and environmental engineering, and among other activities. Point Molate is public land now, and the Point Molate Alliance opposes turning it into a high-end private development that would be owned by its wealthy residents. The Point Molate Alliance wants Point Molate to remain in public hands. So let's revitalize Richmond by building inclusive and well-designed housing for residents at all income levels, near transit and utilities. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sally, very much. I learned a lot from that, actually. I didn't really understand the waterways at Point Molate previously, even though I've hiked there so many times. I'm going to check the chat for any questions now. We'll have a Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your electronic hand, question or comments. And if you have a more in-depth comment, please put it in the chat, and perhaps we will have a presentation on that comment in the future if we can't address it today. Debbie Bayer.
Hi. Sally, you said you were going to discuss this later, or I think you said we're going to discuss living shorelines, but just briefly now, because the coast is eroding, the beach park, that fill that constitutes a beach park is eroding so fast, you know, and little by little trees fall down, or it takes a long time. What can be done now? And is the ultimate goal to have a beach that kind of gently angles up? And do we have room for it between the park and Stenmark?
Yeah, I don't know whether how much space there's going to be, because the Bay Trail is going to come through between the beach and Stenmark Drive. And my bet, which is totally uninformed, is that there probably originally was a gradual sandy beach that came up to the level of Stenmark, but then it got filled in when the Navy bulldozed to make a drum lot 2. And I'm thinking that it probably, I mean, I don't know what is the best thing to recommend for this. I mean, I would want to convene a panel of people who are more expert at this than I am, and have people talk about what constitutes what a living levee could do. Is a living levee appropriate for that particular location? We want to preserve the eelgrass. We need to be able to handle the water coming down the hill. And so and of course the public should be able to maintain some kind of picnic capacity. So it's going to be a complex balancing act, and I wouldn't want to just speak off the cuff about what needs to be done.
Thank you. Chip Gribble.
Sorry for being late. I just caught the tail end of it, which sounded really good. This is data. This is archived, right? So there's a recording of this. There will be.
Yes.
Okay. I think with the living levee concept, or some type of a shoreline where you've got, it's graded, like mud flats, uplands, wetlands, and so on. All those different micro niches, if you will. If you think about it, the Bay already has what it's got. And there's so much building up to the shoreline everywhere. There isn't a whole lot of opportunity. There's seriously limited opportunity to do these kinds of living levees. And ultimately, where this has got to come into a real contest is with the State Lands Commission, to consider it on a large scale, filling in more of the Bay to allow this kind of living levee or wetlands, shorelines, mudflats to be developed. So we've got that kind of ecosystem in the future. Otherwise, there won't be any wetlands. They'll be underwater. So
Chip, I think you just nominated yourself for the talk on living levees.
Sorry. The outfalls, and you had one out. I just saw the one picture of the outfall. It was well above looked like the surface water elevation. Are all of those outfalls that much higher than the Bay water level?
Well, it kind of depends on what the tide's doing at the time that you walk along the beach. When the tide comes in, you can't walk along the beach. And then it depends on what the level of the tide is. So I think when they were put in, the tides were actually much lower, and they probably just wanted to be able to dig a relatively shallow trench to install the outfalls. But I made a value judgment. I decided not to bore all of you with pictures of every outfall. But I could have done that to you. But you all would have clicked off. Anyway, they are at highly variable levels above the beach. Some of them are just practically lying on the beach, and others are elevated 6 or 8 feet. So, I think it just depended on what mood the Navy was in at the time.
Thank you. Jim, Sarah Sustine, I think you had your hand up first, and then Jim Hansen.
Thank you, Sally, for the presentation. And as I'm hearing you and also Chip talk about what can be done, what would be most fruitful in a way. The negative in me, the part that says, and if we have to sell it to the Native American tribe, then do we have any say in what happens? And all sorts of political questions like that in terms of the future of Point Molate. And if anyone has any answers, I would appreciate them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so actually the Richmond Community News is coming out with a number of articles and a website that will give answers to many of your questions, Sarah. But let me just say that if the opinions vary a little bit about whether the casino developer and the tribe will actually own the land conditionally, or whether they actually just have marketing rights. But basically, everything they propose to do has to go through the city.
Thank you.
And so that is basically really good news. And all of us are hoping that negotiations can be successful in maintaining Point Molate as public land.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Hansen.
You're muted.
Sometimes the buttons don't cooperate. I think they mess with you. It's not me. Thanks, Sally, and everybody. Hi. So I'll just comment that having actually gone out to the drum lot that you pointed out across from the beach park, one year that I can't even remember, where it rained quite a bit, you can actually see, you could see the water kind of sheeting across that concrete. So those drainages are very active. And during that period, if you were to go out on the beach park, which, as you say, is fill, and I could talk about that briefly as in terms of an alternative to what's there, there would be kind of gushy spots. So the whole groundwater system is very alive and active, not only in the drainage that you pointed out as you walk up the hill to the right, where the Aristolochia and the pipevine swallowtail are growing very thickly, but the water system out there is still very active in supporting the plant life and kind of moving underground. The other interesting thing is, if you, I just say anybody walking on the beach, if you look at, you can see these layers, and you saw a little bit of that in the pipe. These layers, and you can see the layer of fill and what probably was the original shoreline, quite a bit lower. And it's really interesting because that's where the water comes out. So it's a fascinating thing to watch, which does bring up that while we had a Point Molate advisory committee, I worked with a fellow landscape architect, and we came up with a proposal to essentially remove the fill in that park and restore the original grade, which was very mild. Right now, it's like a flat parking lot because the fill was made flat. And it has its value as a park, but you could remove, basically take a big half moon of soil out of there and bring back the original shoreline grade where the shrimp camp was and so forth, and still have a park there around the edges. So there's opportunities there, but it is a fascinating place just to watch the hydrology. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Chip Gribble.
Yeah, what a picture I got from Jim's description is that the water is coming out at the base of the fill on top of the original bay mud surface, and that implies or suggests that the fill is a coarse-grained material that's not doesn't have a lot of mud, In other words, it's far more permeable. And by the way, if it's to the extent that that shoreline is tidally influenced, I don't know that it is. I don't know that. Not that familiar with it. The tidally influenced areas, the concept, there's a little bit of misunderstanding about the concept with the salt water and the fresh water floating on top. That's not really very realistic if you've got tidally mixed in a tidally mixed zone. That's much more applicable to deeper, more quiescent groundwaters.
Well, what's going on there now, which is, I'll just add real briefly, where we've had king tides, they've started to erode that fill bluff at the site. So that's probably going to increase over time. There's also a proposal to add riprap just at the north, kind of the north third of the park, all the way up to the Quonset hut, where the erosion, because of a lack of, because there's riprap around the rest of the way, but that's to be able to put a section of the Bay Trail along the edge of the bluff there. So it's an active, very active area.
Jim, can you explain for everybody what riprap is, just in case they don't know?
Basically big boulders that are like 3 feet across. And if you go out there, they come in various sizes, but it's essentially meant to absorb the wave action, the power of wave action, and to help to limit erosion to some degree. But there's a lot that goes on, and more people know about this than I do, but sometimes it changes the whole water currents along the shoreline, and you can get erosion where the riprap stops. And that's kind of what's happening right there at the Quonset hut. The riprap stops there, and there's a big cut where the bank is falling in.
Jeannie Quartz? Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Chip.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. It was an excellent presentation, and I learned way more than I thought I already knew about Point Molate. You had mentioned something about the prairie grass, the indigenous prairie grass.
Mm-hmm.
Does that include the Point Molate fescue as well, or is that in another location?
There is a Point Molate fescue that I think it's being, I mean, Jim would know more about this than I do, but it's being sold in nurseries as a really nice little fescue, which is a little grass with almost tubular little leaves that come up. I honestly don't know whether it is a member of Coastal Terrace Prairie or not. The membership can be very different from one place to another, which is one reason why the Endangered Species Act has not protected it as much as it's protected, say, the bald eagle, because the Endangered Species Act was written for single species rather than for entire little variable ecosystems that are under threat. So California has lost a huge majority of its coastal terrace prairie, mostly because it looks kind of small and unassuming in comparison with the redwood tree, and people haven't recognized it for what it is. And if I just said something wrong, Jim will correct me.
Thank you.
Oh, nothing wrong. It is part of the coastal prairie. It's a ecotype, as far as we know, to Point Molate. It's a little grayer than the Festuca rubras, or what they call the red fescues, that actually do grow all the way around the world. They're a circumpolar grass, but this one is kind of unique. It is unique to the place, and it has, Dave Ame years ago, with the start of the California Native Grasslands Association, went out and pulled some seeds, and this time of year, the plants are ripening, the seeds are ripening, and entered it into the nursery trade. So it is does require water, and that's why it's along the coast. It picks up some moisture in different ways, including from the fog and so forth. But it's a lot lower. It's a bunch grass. It is slightly rhizomatous. In other words, it spreads a little bit. And it has been used as a ornamental alternative to certainly higher water grasses, but it's not something you play football on. Yeah, but it is unique to the site.
Thank you, Jim. I have a question. Sally, you spoke about a native plant survey, and after removal of invasives, more native plants were found that hadn't been identified.
Right.
I know you've done a bit of work on sequoia, and I'm not sure that it's widely known that the species at Point Molate really haven't been fully surveyed. And I wondered if you could speak to that a bit about in relation to the sequoia process.
Okay, I am not an expert on the land plants like Jim is, and so maybe Jim can deal with that question. I do have the impression that there was a great deal more coastal terrace prairie on Point Molate than what was identified in the plant surveys. But Jim, can you answer that?
I can try real quickly. There was a vegetation map done when the casino was done, but it was only done after those of us from Native Plant Society, California Native Grasslands Association, and residents said, hey, this survey is missing the boat. That was the original Jim Levine and the tribe's vegetation survey. They basically said it was a lot of weedy grasses, which is totally incorrect. So we did, I think because they were concerned their secret could get thrown out because it was so, they missed the boat so badly on that, that they took note of our letters and did do a vegetation survey at the time, which identified patches of vegetation, eucalyptus, the coastal scrub, the annualized grassland, riparian areas, and so forth. So we don't, it's hard to tell exactly what they did this time around when they did the supplemental EIR in terms of plant surveys, but they tend not to be very comprehensive. And we did find areas we pointed out in our secret comments that they had missed, some of the mesic areas that had the rushes and stuff that you pointed out next to the creek and so forth. They did miss areas. And the only good news is it's not an endangered species, but it's an endangered plant community, as you pointed out. So California under CEQA has a requirement to mention sensitive natural communities of plants, trees, shrubs, and so forth. And so that's one of the comments that we do make, is that they need to survey them and mitigate for any impacts to them. And the impacts in this current EIR were just not good. So, but anyway, it's part of the ongoing keeping people accountable.
Thank you, Jim. Do we have any additional questions?
I can't find a button. Can I speak?
Yes, please. Hello, Ellen. Yes.
I just, maybe your collective memory can help me with this. In the late 60s, early 70s, we visited that beach in its earlier version, and the access to the beach, the cliff, so to speak, was much less steep, much shorter, no matter what the tide. And the steps and all that are now decayed. I don't know what the timeline is for when all of that went in. And I was amazed, once they closed the beach and finally opened it up, I was amazed at how high and level the top was. And does anyone know the sequence there? Also, we were visiting in pursuit of what the Chinese shrimp and so forth fisheries were. So there was a fair bit of, we were moving around there. Does anyone know how that
got so high also, are those outlet pipes, are they drain tiled or are they just solid piping? Does anyone know that?
Thank you, Ellen.
To me, the outfalls look like solid piping, and the ones that I see that look really old are some form of cast iron, and they're rusting through. So so those are now I know nothing about the changes in the height of the bank. Maybe somebody else can answer that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
All I can say, Ellen, it's flat because they filled what was the original grade of a gradual. You look at the old there's this famous picture of the shrimp camp, and you can see this gradient, this slight gradient going up into the hills. And that was basically filled to make the beach park. And that's what that flatness is, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Jim. Do we have additional comments or questions? Thank you very, very much. I just want to make one closing comment specific to the beach park. It was opened, the money that paid for that opening and the upgrading, the renovations of the beach park to be open to the public. Oh, it was from the Costco Busan settlement money. And I wanted to give credit to Joan Garrett, who wrote the grant to open that beach park. And she worked with the Parks Department. And she is a founding, really the founding member of the Citizens for Sustainable Point Molate. And I just wanted to give her credit for that, since the opening of the beach park was talked about. And part of that opening, there was not money for maintenance at the time. So there had to be volunteers willing to take care of it. And the Friends of Point Molate stepped up and worked diligently every week to restore the native grassland in the beach park and to maintain the beach park. And they still go out there weekly. Thank you all for joining us. This has been a very informative presentation. And thank you. I hope to see all of you next week. And again, thank you, Sally, very, very much.
You're welcome.
Sally.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye, Sally. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.